Well, more than 3 days after that first earthquake in Turkey, hundreds of thousands of those who survived are now without shelter, water, or electricity, a situation that's even more dangerous given the very low temperatures there at the moment. Aid agencies have sounded the alarm about the potential for a secondary humanitarian crisis caused by those circumstances. And for more on that growing threat, we're joined by Caroline Holt, Director of the IFRC's Disasters, Climate and Crisis Unit. Ms. Holt, thank you for joining us. Now, we're hearing reports that almost 4 days after this disaster, not enough aid is reaching the people who need it most. What are the obstacles here?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me and providing this space. You're quite right. The needs on the ground are absolutely massive, and the complexities of this particular disaster shouldn't be underestimated. What we see, of course, is in Syria in particular, is that a country ravaged by 10 years of war, with, of course, the economic implications that it's experienced in the last few years, COVID, of course. We're experiencing a disaster within a disaster, actually, within Syria itself. In terms of Turkey, I look at the massive size of not only the epicenter, but the affected area. I think the affected area itself actually is the size of France. And one can imagine that with the transportation routes interrupted, with the logistics, purely with just trying to access people that have been impacted by this, and then already working, of course, with already vulnerable populations in some instances. It's always going to be a challenge for any of the aid agencies to arrive in a timely way. All I can say is that from the perspective of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, we are working very closely, of course, with the Turkish Red Crescent on the ground and also the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, and really ensuring that we are utilizing our reach and our volunteers and our staff in branches there. I think it's also worth just pointing out that the people who are the first responders in this, certainly the local first responders, have also been impacted themselves. And I think it is worth spending some time to reflect on this, that these people are leaving their families. They've often suffered quite a lot of loss themselves, and they're actually putting themselves in rather dangerous situations to continue to provide support.
As you mentioned, local people, they're putting themselves on the front line, sometimes with few resources coming from abroad. The international community has rallied with many pledges of financial and concrete help. But what would you say is missing from that response and needs to be done immediately?
Well, I think in terms of gaps, what we're focusing on right now, of course, the window for search and rescue, unfortunately, starts to come to an end at the end of this week, although we don't give up hope. There are some stories still, some very, very hopeful stories coming out. But as the search and rescue phase comes to an end, it really is about providing people with life-saving provision, ensuring that we're dealing with medical emergencies as a result of the destruction, ensuring that we're supporting people with psychosocial support to deal with the trauma that they've faced and that they've experienced firsthand, really ensuring that there is access to safe and clean water. And we heard your colleague there talk about the risk of cholera and already exacerbating a situation that was already present before this disaster happened. So there are plenty of needs still on the ground that we're addressing and really calling to across our membership. And we do have a lot of solidarity globally with governments and also with national society, Red Cross, Red Crescent, national societies who are providing that support to us.
Now, you briefly touched on the situation in Syria. Many of those parts of Syria had been depleted by close to 12 years of war there. What are the very specific challenges that Syrians are facing in those areas, and what's the possibilities for a response at the moment?
Yes, you're quite right. I mean, Syria, it's a perfect humanitarian storm that was waiting to happen, of course. As I said before, we have 10 years of war, and this really is a disaster within a disaster for those people. The needs are very much around food and shelter, around health and water, around basic household goods. But don't forget, people are outside, and I think our particular focus right now is really around supporting people so that they're not suffering from exposure. The winter is harsh, the temperatures are harsh, and the environment that these people now find themselves in is one that will create an ongoing and prolonged disaster for them personally. So really, it's about providing them with some sort of shelter. But of course, what does that look like? Tents are the go-to in this situation as a temporary form, but of course a tent only provides so much protection in temperatures that drop below zero frequently. So we're really working with our partners on the ground, with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, with the Turkish Red Crescent, to look at more sustainable ways of providing people with prolonged shelter and support.
Caroline Holt, thank you very much for speaking to us there. Caroline Holt speaking from Geneva from the IFRC. Well, that's all we've got time for this bulletin, but we'll be back in just a moment with more news coming up here on France 24.